Okay, Grandpa, if you could just start, tell us your name and where you were born.
My name is Everett Duncan. I was born in 1919, May 22, 1919.
Who are your parents?
My parents was George Duncan and my mother was Eugenia MacDonald.
Where were you born?
I was born in Ferrin, Utah.
USA.
Okay, Grandma, we're going to do the same thing in just 1 second. I'll tell you when to go. Okay? Tell me when and where you were born. Name your name first.
My name is Nola Wilson Duncan, and I was born in Riverside, Idaho, July the 22nd, 1921.
Who are your parents?
My parents were Joseph Leonard Wilson and Lucy Caroline Dean.
Excellent. Okay. First of all, after looking through those questions, what was your favorite? What do you want to talk about most?
Oh, probably the improvements over the years since I was born. I've seen the automobile industry and communications and travel and all the situations we live with has been modernized and improved.
Grandma?
Improved a little bit more than we want them to.
How about you expound on that? What do you mean?
Well, all this modern technology, like the computers, it takes young minds to absorb it all.
Okay. Let's go ahead and start. Let me find the area I want to be in. Okay. Let's talk about how you met. Grandma, do you want to start that?
Well, I think Everett, my sister went up to visit with my older sister, who was living in Driggs, Idaho.
Okay, let's start over with names. Which sisters?
Oh, my oldest sister, Elitha, was living in Driggs, Idaho. And my sister, Rhea, that was just the next one older than me, went up to visit with her and decided to work in a store there. And there was a young man came in to the store and decided that he liked her. And that happened to be Everett's brother. And that's how we met, is through my sister and Everett's brother.
And if I understand correct, they actually ended up together as well.
Yes,
It must have been fun for your children.
yes.
So our children had double cousins.
Okay. And Grandpa, how did you propose?
Well, it was a situation where I had worked all summer with Nola in the hayfield and in the bean fields, and I was getting ready to go and harvest beets with my older brothers. They lived in Rockford area of Idaho, and as I was leaving Nola's area, I came through the porch, and she was there to send me off, and she took my arm, and squeezed it, and something happened to me at that time. It was then I hadn't before this time thought about marriage, but I did at this time. When she took a hold of me and squeezed my arm, I made up my mind then that she was the one I was going to marry.
But he never did tell me for years afterwards.
And it stuck, and it stuck. When I went back to college and was meeting with those beautiful girls and all the sweethearts down in college. I never did receive any kind of a fascination for any of them. I just respected them, and that was all.
Excellent. Let's see. Okay. Where were you married?
We were married in the Salt Lake Temple, 1941.
What day?
September the 24th.
We tried for the 22nd, and I'll let Everett tell you about that.
We hadn't received our recommends, and we had to wait until they came. My bishop promised me he would send my recommend from Farron up to Salt Lake City, and something in his health and his sickness, he failed to get it to me on time, so we were delayed to September 24th, 1941.
Okay, Grandma, what stands out most about your wedding day?
Oh, just that it finally came about. My parents were farmers, and their crops were ready to harvest, and the harvesters were ready to come and take care of it. And so they felt like they needed to go home. They couldn't wait for his recommend to come. So they went home when it was just Everett and I to go to the temple. But the lady I was rooming with and her daughter and a lady next door went to the temple with me, but Everett didn't have anyone going to the temple with him. He was there all by himself. So that's always stood out in my mind, that usually they have a big crowd there. And it was the other members on the sessions, 7 o'clock at night, that went into the room for us. It wasn't family members.
What about you, Grandpa? What do you remember most?
Well, I had no idea what the temple activity would be. And I remember now what has changed in the temple ordinance that we went through in that time as to what they have made some, not corrections, but some improvements in what they do for the brethren and the sisters as they go through the temple.
Okay, I'm going to put this up real quick. I'm actually picking up some of your hand there. We can do this. If you want to just rest your hand on there, that's going to be a lot quieter for you.
It's really sensitive, isn't it?
Extremely. It's not the problem of getting the sound to come in, it's the problem of getting sound you don't want. So, okay. Well, while we're on the subject, when was your first child born?
1943. Was born in Pocatello, Idaho. That was Ron. And I was working for Walgreens drugstore as a cafe operator. And I worked there for approximately 10 years, off and on. I'd worked for Walgreens drugstore in Pocatello and in Ogden and in Salt Lake City and in Idaho Falls. So I worked in a lot of their stores as a cafe manager.
And how was it different to have a child back then as compared to now, as a woman and as a parent? What was different about it?
Well, we never had any life insurance at that time. And I don't know what it cost. I think $200 or $300 for that first child to be born. And the next one was Kaylin, and it probably cost us $300 that time.
What about you, Grandma? As a mother, what was different about having a child that you've noticed between your experience and your children?
Nowadays they get the mother up and walk her around the room, and she goes home maybe even that night, sometimes the next day. And it used to be that they kept you in bed for 10 days and then get you up, and you had to have someone with you because you'd lost some of your strength. It's much better nowadays that get up and move around and keep your strength rather than lose it by laying around for 10 days.
Okay. I'm going to go. These are actually some questions that I got from my sister Deanna. These are some things that she wanted to know. She said I can change how this is asked, but she basically wants to know, I mean, honestly, you have a fairly successful family statistically. 9 children who are all on the straight and narrow, as Deanna put it. What would you attribute that to? What do you think that your parenting technique was?
Well, this is basically on the church standard. I think both Nola and I brought with us from the spirit world a pattern of behavior that was initial and standard production for our lives, and we started with a firm and a decided pattern of behavior that was in harmony with the gospel standards.
And we pretty much agreed with each other too. We were thinking along the same lines.
I think the fact of the possibility of how much information we brought with us from the spirit world is yet to be determined, but I can see it happening to our children. I feel there was a certain amount of that influence with each of our children as they came to us.
What were the methods of discipline you used for your children?
We never paddled. It was not, we usually had things corrected before they happened. I would not tolerate screaming and loud shouting in the home. If they were going to do that, go outside. But in the home, our house was always quiet and respectful, and I think it was consistent that way.
And Everett usually worked and came home so about a regular time. So we always had our meals together. The children would get up and have breakfast with us. We'd wait until Everett came home at night to have our evening meal. And I think that was a good thing.
We utilized a situation that I grew up in my home. I got more counsel from my parents at our supper dinner table. We sat there and they talked about events in their life and during their daily activities that indicated and made it plain and clear to us that stealing and cheating and lying and these outside activities were not tolerated, and we learned about that at the dinner table. So we utilized that in our home, that we took that time to tell stories and record some of the events of our day that helped us to teach that principle of conduct in their lives.
Would you change anything? Now that when we start being parents, we're not qualified to be parents. And when we're done being parents, that's when we start to figure it out. What would you change?
I don't know that there was I don't see any improvement anywhere that I would change or trade for. We were quite happy and a loving family. I think that we loved the kids and in turn they loved us.
What about you, Grandma?
Well, Everett always said that we got extra special spirits. The Lord sent us good ones, so we didn't have the challenges that some of the parents did. I don't know how true that was.
I don't know how we'd have corrected a problem child.
Okay, let's see. Let's see. Is there anything else you can think of, whether it be from your family life, growing up as children, or as parents, that you'd like to add? I mean, especially speaking to your future generations.
I don't know that there's any particular. I think the one thing that comes to my mind in the present day youth is their lack of respect for their body, keeping it covered. Brigham Young said one time, he was unhappy with this young lady because she had her skirt was so high that he could see her ankles. So the extreme there is not part of today's pattern. They expose much of their body that should not be exposed.
What would you say has made your marriage successful?
The gospel in the first place. I think the bishop told me it was not when I was a high priest and not a priest in the Aaronic priesthood. I remember this very distinctly, that when he let us go that day, he said, I want to tell you something, fellas. You don't get married only in the temple. A temple marriage for you guys is what you need. And that has stayed with me all over the years, and I've respected that counsel, and it has proven to be the right thing.
What are your thoughts, Grandma?
Now, what was the question?
What do you feel has made your marriage successful?
I think, like Everett said, the influence of the gospel in our lives. There's so many other things that could have entered in that would have been maybe disastrous. But living the gospel principles and listening to the leaders is what we wanted to do, and we tried to obey their instructions.
Gospel principles affect the lives of everyone, whether they be members of the church or not. You've mentioned principles. What are the principles you feel really contribute to a marriage? If there's someone who's not aware of the church, but they have a healthy marriage because they're living correct principles, what principles do you feel that those are, specifically?
To start with, we had to discover that it was irreligious to shop on Sunday. I had an experience with a young couple one time. I went to their home. I was in the bishopric, and I went to their home to have some business taken care of, and as I entered, the young man said, "Get Brother Duncan a taco. Would you like a taco?" And I said, "Well, what's a taco?" And he said, well, he reached in his pocket and, well, he said to his daughter, "Fix Brother Duncan a taco." She says, "We've run out. I don't have any." And he reached in his pocket and got some money and give it to her and says, "Go across the street." It was right there across the street, and buy some more. "Dad, it's Sunday." Oh, she finally went and got the taco, and I had a taco, but the next Sunday was the real trial of that event. He told me, after you had your taco and went home, my family jumped on me and reminded me that he'd been trying to teach them the gospel, and then he'd give up. He says, "That won't happen again. We won't shop on Sunday." So that was new to me in a real aspect of our conduct, that we haven't shopped on Sunday either.
What do you think, Grandma? What other principles attribute to a marriage?
I think respect for the other person, and respect for what his decisions are and what his thoughts are. Maybe I might have disagreed with him and we talked about it, but just respect the other's ideas.
Excellent. How have you noticed that marriage has changed from your generation to today's generation? What have you seen that's different?
I see a lack of acceptance. A young man and a young lady getting ready to be married, they haven't fully considered the commitment they're making. They're not thinking through on moral issues and a relationship of the young man keeping his eyes off of the girls in the neighborhood, or her keeping her mind on her business in such a way that they are totally united rather than just a kind of a physical arrangement.
What do you think, Grandma?
Changes?
Yeah, to marriage today versus when you and Grandpa met each other.
Well, I don't see much different in the marriages of our grandchildren, but in marriages of other people who are not committed to the church or any religion, they just they don't respect it like they should. They don't honor it like they should.
What do you see in your children's marriages that you've appreciated?
This has been very, very consoling to us to be reminded of a comment made in the temple ordinance of marriage, to rejoice in your posterity. This is something that is coming to us in full measure because they are all dedicated to a certain degree of maintaining and keeping the commandments that we have recognized to be so stable.
What do you think, Grandma? In your children's marriages, what have you appreciated?
Well, our children's marriages have, in the most part, been just fine. They're doing okay. We're real pleased with it. Some of them have had more burdens to bear than we had, but they've handled it well, and they've got good children. Our grandchildren are following the patterns in the most part.
Excellent. When you two were dating, what was a typical activity for you?
We didn't have money to go watch movies.
No, we didn't. We had roller skates, and we went out on the highway and roller skated for a while, and we I think we went into a swimming pool at one time. We lived close by the Snake River, so we did some swimming in the Snake River.
Had to be careful not to get out too deep because I didn't ever learn how to swim.
It was mostly a wading process.
We had 3 canals that went around on our farm, through it or in front of it, and I was cautioned not to get too close to them, so I never did learn how to swim. I still don't know how.
Wow. Let's talk a little bit. Okay. How has your daily lifestyle changed throughout your life? What you do throughout the day? I mean,
When I started I went to school to be a construction operator. I did plans for a home and to build it and to learn about the members of a home that had to be bought, and that has been pretty much my life. After I got through with the cafe operation, I went into the carpenter business and have stayed with that the rest of my life. But that was an honorable, in my mind, I was doing an honorable job and I enjoyed it very much. I didn't get involved in selling. I tried to sell life insurance for a while, and I got involved in the food supplements, and I've been involved in many of those 4 or 5 different food supplement businesses that have finally got us into USANA, which we at present time give credit, much credit for our good health.
let's see. At this point in life, what would you consider most important to you?
The gospel has identified a pattern of activity for each of us individually to come closer to the Lord and find out more of a positive understanding of who the Father is and who the Savior is, and what we need to do to protect our personal activities from getting invited outside. I think the gospel has been, there isn't anything out there, no business application of any kind of a business that has any attraction which even compares to the gospel.
Grandma, it looks like you had a thought. What's most important to you?
Well, I think one of the most important things to us is our family. And hopefully we won't have any empty seats when we go to the hereafter, that we can still be a family and united with all of them. That would be ideal. And that, I think, is what we've been striving for all our life.
If you were to take the gospel and someone were to ask you, and you enter an elevator and you only have 30 seconds to tell them what the gospel's #1 message is, what would you say the #1 message of the church is?
The #1 message is that there is a God. There positively is a God, and He has a family, and His Son, Jesus Christ, is the other member of the Godhead, along with the Holy Ghost. That's the foundation. If we don't understand that building, I'm a builder by trade, and if I don't get a foundation in place, I can't put anything on it. But if we have the Father in His proper setting, the Son in His proper setting, and the Holy Ghost to start with, we can build on that.
Do you have any thoughts, Grandma?
I agree with what he said.
Okay. Okay. What do you think someone must do to be living a good life?
He has to have a command of his own thinking. He needs to be able to think and decide to accept this or accept that, or to identify what is the more desirable activities. Some are fishing and hunting and shopping, and there are many fields of activity, but the one thing that is most important is, are you in control of your own life?
What do you think?
I think having a positive attitude as much as possible is important. It helps you and it helps those around you if you can be positive. It helps their days go.
We have a policy in our family. We've discovered about a little saying that an old Indian chief had a son that was in trouble once in a while, and he finally got a hold of him and said, "Why are you in trouble?" He said, "Well, I have 2 dogs. One's a good dog and one's a bad dog. And when the good dog's around, I don't have any trouble. When I have the bad dog around, he kind of gets me into trouble." And his father told him, "Son, quit feeding the bad dog. Quit feeding the bad dog and he'll go away." And we adopted that policy. When Nola gets to talking about the negative things of life, I tell her, "Quit feeding the bad dog." And she gets on my case the same way.
Excellent. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the past. What was your first house like together? Not necessarily your first home that you purchased, but your first living area. Where was it and what was it like?
It was in Pocatello. We had just gotten married and I was working for Walgreens and I needed a place to live, so I located a place on the east side of town, and I was able to walk to town. It was a small 2-bedroom apartment that cost us $25 a month.
What was it like to be there?
It was very adequate. It was clean. The people were respectable that owned the home, and we had no problem with mischief along that. We could walk to work, and she could walk to work, and we had no problem with anybody interrupting our travel.
We lived there for 4 years. And then he was transferred, Walgreens transferred him to Salt Lake. And for about 10 years, they transferred us back and forth. Whenever we thought we'd buy a home, they'd transfer him. So it was about 10 years before we got our own home. And that was in Idaho Falls on Ada Street. And it needed a lot of work. And he got busy and fixed it up so it was presentable. Put the water in the house instead of out in the yard. Made a bathroom for us. And that was our first real home that we owned.
Grandma, what were you doing for work in your first place?
Well, I went to the LDS Business College out of high school. And I lived with this sister that had moved from Idaho down there. So my parents talked to her, and she says, well, let her come and live with us. And that was a good thing because they were good people, and she had 2 girls about my age. And I'm glad I went to the LDS Business College. It was a good environment, and I graduated. And before I left the college, I took an examination with the government as a secretary. And within a year, I went from $30 to $60 to $90, and then the government said they had a position for me. And I made $120 a month. And that was really good wages. It was more than Everett's brothers were earning.
More than I was earning. Well, she was working as a secretary for the, what was it,
the Department of Agriculture, the Soil Conservation Service.
Now, did you give up that job when you had children?
Yes.
What are your thoughts on working mothers?
As much as possible, I think they should be home with their children.
Why is that?
Because they need the companionship with their children. Their children need you, and you need to take care of them. I worked for Everett's boss for a short while because he needed a secretary, and he knew that we needed a little more money. So I worked as a secretary for him. But our children, and they were being taught by a sister in the ward while I was gone, and she was good to them, but they were unhappy. To such an extent they didn't want to have me go to work, so I quit. And we've got by all right since then.
Excellent. Okay. Let's see.
However, with my secretarial training and bookkeeping and training, I've been
been my secretary.
It's been his secretary, taking care of his bookwork all the years, and he hasn't had to hire somebody to do it.
And that was something you could do from home.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Before you were married, let's talk about your childhood. Grandpa, what would you say your earliest memory is?
Of my father was going from one job to another, which was another farm. So it was a quite an adventure to go onto this farm and see all the ducks and the geese and the horses and the cows and what it took to put them together. And I was always interested in the animal kingdom. I did enjoy the kind of animals.
What toys did you play with as a child?
We had kick the can. We'd have a stick in our hands that we could beat that can or we could kick it along. And there was holes in the ground. My hole was here and his hole was there and another hole over here. And we tried to start at a place and kick our can, and they were trying to keep my can out of the hole. I was trying to keep their hand. So that was one of our long time. And marbles. We played a lot of marbles.
What were your family chores like? What type of chores did you do as a boy?
Wood for the kitchen stove and the heater. We had to cut wood, and that was and make sure that the cows was milked and the pigs were fed and chickens fed and locked up for the night. So we had a regular assignment. Each boy had one thing to do, and he better do it every night.
Grandma, what's one of your earliest memories?
As a child, I had older ones. I was the youngest one. There was 4 years between me and my brother, and then 7 years before a sister. So I was pretty much by myself. It was always a happy time when the people in the area would come and pick my father's and mother's raspberry patch, because they bring their children in and have someone to play with.
What toys did you play with as a child?
Oh, dolls, of course, and I guess that would be mostly it. Wayne's sister used to come and spend a couple of weeks with them, and it would be just next door. And we'd go out on the rock pile and pick up the rocks and decide which ones was the prettiest. Wash them and take care of them. I don't. And then apple tree, my parents always had apple trees. So we'd climb up in a tree and sit there and have apples. There were swings. We put the ropes on the limbs and have a swing. And roller skates. I got roller skates for Christmas. And unless I went out on the street, it was the kitchen floor. We didn't have concrete then.
What did you do for chores as a girl?
For sports.
Chores.
Chores.
I also brought in the kindling and the wood and the coal. And I didn't really have a lot of chores. All the older ones took care of everything.
Was there anything about being the youngest that you enjoyed?
It was a problem. More of a joy, wasn't it?
We lived, I didn't have any close neighbors, you know. Everything was quite a long ways away. So I was pretty much by myself. Had to find something to do that way. I think I had kind of a lonely time, and my parents always went to church. I went to church with them. And then in the afternoon, they had worked hard all week long, so in the afternoon they'd have a nap. I was left all by myself.
Do you remember ever being disciplined as a child by your parents?
Disciplined?
Yeah. Do you remember any times getting in trouble and how you felt?
Well, there was one time we were riding a horse about 3 miles down to the school. And my parents waited and waited and waited, and the horse didn't come home. I was riding it with my brother, 4 years older. And he had stopped to play and have a good time on the way home. And it was after dark, before they heard the horse come in. So that was the one time that my brother got paddled for not, making them worry so hard, and I kind of agree with that. But when it came my turn to be paddled, he relented and didn't paddle me. It was his responsibility, I think. But that's the closest I ever got. And I was pretty anxious that he didn't do it.
What about you, Grandpa? Remember how your father disciplined?
My father I never did see him strike anybody. He did, we got our counsel at the dinner table, and we pretty well knew what was acceptable, and nobody was ever, I never seen him ever paddle any of us.
What do you think about today's discipline? What do you think is appropriate for parents today?
Well, we hear about them standing in the corner with their nose in the wall and are not having any privileges denied them for a period of time. And I think there's something lacking in the starting period of correction that we enjoyed, that I don't see the parents thinking about that. They're thinking about sending that little girl or that little boy into the corner and making him sit on a stool there for a period of time. I hardly disagree with that. There are better ways.
For what would be an example? What would you say is better for them?
Before they get out of hand, like we did, we discovered early there'd be no shouting and no loud talking in the house. And they get started on that pattern along with other events of taking your sister's book and destroying it, or abusing your siblings' property. We taught that to start with, and I think the parents can do that early to show the children that the ownership of a book or a toy or something is to be respected, and know how to handle it.
What do you think, Grandma, about discipline?
I don't know, we didn't have to use it very much.
We didn't.
Some of our friends would say, oh, these teenagers don't know what to do with them. But our teenagers didn't give us any problems. We didn't have to use a disciplinary problem. And we've wondered about it since. I think just show love for them. If you're going to discipline them, still show them love. Don't let them feel like they're no good.
Okay, let me think. There's a few more things. I do want to touch on a few other things, but okay, yeah, let's stick on this topic. Did you receive an allowance as a child?
No.
Actually, I need to be careful how I do this. I'm actually not going to be in this video. My questions won't come up, so if you hear a question from me, go ahead and start over and say, like, no, I did not get an allowance, things like that, and just talk about your thoughts.
Right. There wasn't much money available. If my father had, he had a job for the city as the city marshal for $30 a month. And that was adequate in those days and I remember in my own case, I had 25 cents in my pocket that I carried the full school year. I never spent that 25 cents. Money was not much available to us at that time. So an allowance was didn't even talk about. I never hear about them till later.
And that was true among your friends as well?
Yes.
What about you, Grandma? Is that the same?
We never had an allowance either. But there was two girls that were good friends with me. And we liked to go to the store that was close to the school building and buy a 3 Musketeer candy bar. There was 3 units in it, one for each one of us. And we'd take turns asking our dads for a nickel so we could go buy the candy bar. That's the extent of it.
Did you ever offer your children an allowance?
No, we didn't. Didn't feel like it was proper. It was something that we learned earlier. Don't start something you can't finish. And if we'd have started it, it's hard to tell what would have been expected.
Okay. Let's see.
How do you feel about an allowance?
I don't have enough money to give an allowance.
Not yet, huh?
No.
If you did have it, what would you do?
I think a good experiment that I'd like to try is to take something that I would need to supply my children with, like clothing, and if I give them allowance, I don't give them clothing and they become responsible to supply themselves with that. Something like that. I like that idea. I don't know. I've heard that and I think I like that idea, but if my children spend it on something else, they will need clothing, so I don't know if that will work. But
Well, they like a little treat now and then, too.
I don't think we ever paid our children a bit of money for doing a chore or finish a job or doing, until they got old enough to work as a carpenter or whatever. I paid them, but as a child in the home and around the yard, they never got paid for doing anything.
When he hired them to work for him, depend on the job, whether there was enough left after he paid them first, made sure that they had what they earned. If there was enough left for us to live on, that was fine. If there wasn't, we did without. But he was honest with these boys when he hired them.
excellent. Do you remember any fads from your youth? Hairstyles or clothing styles that stand out in your mind?
I've noticed this, that the fads of dress and hair, caring for their hair and one thing, was quite modest in the early days of my life. It's gotten a little bit more important for a young lady or a young man to wear the right clothes or the right pants that was acceptable for the rest of the group. So I see more of that today than we ever saw. We could wear our Levi's to school. Everybody wore Levi's pants to school.
Everett lived in a housing unit when he was going to college where the other boys lived, and he was cutting all of their hair for them. Not that he was a barber, but he just did a good job. So when he went to my home, my dad would ask him to cut his hair, you know. Just something that he picked up and helped other people with.
Excellent. What school activities did you participate in, whether it be sports or academic?
Sports, I was in, I did quite a bit in what do you call it, not arguments, but in debate. I was involved, and I felt personally that I was quite successful in that sort of thing, in classwork. And as far as football, I was probably the fastest runner in the high school, and I was designated to be the quarterback of our high school football team. And that lasted, well, not very long, because we didn't have the money to participate with the rest of the county and other schools. But I did have some encouragement there. I could throw the ball and I could catch it and I could run with it, and I was quite pleased with my production in football.
What about you, Carol?
Well, our grade school had a gym with basketball hoops in each end. So I learned to play basketball. I was one of the taller ones, so I was the jump center. And they did a lot of racing. And another girl, every other year, they would do it according to our birthdays, I think. Because every other year, I would win it, and then she would win it the next year. Let's see, there was something else I was thinking of, too. Oh, it's gone.
Let's see. Were you ever mentioned in the newspaper or on the news for anything?
Yes, yes. He and a friend of his, when we lived out to Arco, built a barn where the cows could come in and 4 of them could be milked at one time, and that was unusual. And they designed it and built it themselves, and I have a picture of that. It was in the newspaper.
Do you still have a clipping of that newspaper?
Yes, yes. It was designed for a 4-square arrangement, a cow on every side of the barn, and a pit right in the middle for a worker to stand in, and he would wash the cows and milk them and move these 2 out and bring 2 new ones in and milking these other 2. So
They were using electrical milkers.
It was one of the first designed milkers other than just sitting down to a cow and milking them.
Do you remember the time when automobiles were not common?
Yes.
What was your first automobile like?
A Model T. We had to crank them. They didn't have batteries in them, and you had to crank them, and it took quite a bit. No windshield wipers, and they were not completely covered. They had the windshield and a top on it, but that's all. No side panels to keep the wind out on the sides. And it was, they were very simple. A foot brake and the gas feed was up here on the steering wheel. You pull that handle up and down for speed, and they eventually put in the foot feed for the gas feed.
What was the transmission like?
There was a shifting device to forward and reverse. And in the forward gear there was low, medium, and high to travel.
Was that to begin with
Yes.
in the first cars?
You put your foot on the clutch and disengage the transmission and shift it into a gear, and then
how old were you when you first started to drive?
when I first started to drive was a 1936 Chevrolet. I was about 19.
Did they have driver's licenses?
No, we didn't have license then.
What did you do?
I don't know when that started. I've forgotten when the licenses started, but everybody drove.
Okay. Who were your childhood heroes?
My bishop was a special individual. He was my 6th grade school teacher and also my bishop at the church. And one time he discovered the children were stealing candy at the grocery store. And he reminded them, he said, I want to tell you, boys and girls, you'll go to hell for stealing one candy bar rather than stealing the automobile. If you keep stealing candy, you'll go to hell. And I remember that I was in the 6th grade when he told us that.
What about you, Grandma? Do you have any childhood heroes?
Ask me a question.
Childhood heroes?
I think my sister, Letha, was my childhood She's 13 years older, and when I was in the 4th grade, she was my teacher.
What was some of your favorite music?
Well, the waltz, what was it? Blue Danube. I think that stands out more typically of my favorite. There was other, but that has stayed with me from the first time I heard it.
What about you, Grandma?
Well, Everett had the shows going on once a week right next door to his house, but I didn't see a show of any kind until I was all grown up, ready to leave home.
Do you remember what the show was?
No, I don't. But it was.
Tom Mix.
No, that was you. I remember them getting a recorder, a radio. So we did listen to some of those little cartoon affairs.
If you could go back and live your life in a decade, you know, for lifestyle, what would you choose? What was your most comfortable lifestyle as far as society?
I think it was in my final years of high school, 4, 5, and 6 years of senior high school. It was more rewarding, and activity was more effective and more successful, and enjoyed the companionship of the members of the ward or the school classroom, and the teachers were all the kind of men that were respectable and honest people. I think they left a permanent impression on my mind of a pattern of life.
What about you, Grandma? Do you have a favorite era, time?
High school. High school was nice. And I enjoyed the teachers and the lessons and all that. And there was some girls groups. One was IS, one was Big Sisters, you know, as a sophomore and a junior and a senior. And they chose me to be a part of those groups all 3 years for some reason. I don't know. And anyway, it was nice to be a group of among the other girls. And it wasn't for a big group. It was maybe about 10 girls is all.
Do you remember any big world events that have happened in your lifetime?
The Pearl Harbor probably was come at a time when we were able to recognize and evaluate what was going on. That was startling, and it was something we could visualize what's going to happen now, what next. So it was. I tried to enlist in the Army. It was about that time. I was trying to get into the Marine Corps. And when I went for a test, they discovered my eardrums were both ruptured. So they wouldn't allow me they wouldn't let me in the Navy, they wouldn't let me in the Army or in the Marines. But I was pretty much aware of that event.
How did the war affect your lives?
The rationing of the goods because of the war, gasoline was rationed, shoes were rationed, sugar was rationed, meat was rationed. I was in the cafe business at the time, and when they cut me down on my meat, it changed my pattern of operation.
What about in the home?
Well, we had Ron at that time, just a baby, but he got a ration for shoes. So Everett and I was able to use his tickets and have plenty of shoes. But it was managed pretty good. I think the government did a good job.
We managed that in our home. I had more problem in the cafe.
I see. What are your thoughts on your children?
Now,
Or in the past? Just anything you can think of.
I'm quite impressed with their ability to manage their life. They've got educations that's moving them along in their field of activity that is most agreeable and acceptable to us. I don't understand all what Brent's doing or what Dean's doing or Ron or what they're doing in detail, but the overall picture is over and above my head.
and if we need help, we know where to go. Our kids can all help us out. If we have trouble with the computer, most of them know more about it than
They can fix it.
Yeah.
And for money, they're available to come to our aid. We haven't really needed it yet, but they offer it all the time. So we're quite pleased with their conduct and what they're doing.
What do you spend your days doing now?
in the wintertime it's a problem. If we could go outside, we could find a lot to do. They have tried to get us situated with extraction work, and I have trouble with seeing the small writing, so I haven't been able to do it.
We may get involved in that. I've been trying to do it, but my mind is not serving me well for remembering. You could tell me your name in a minute, I'd forget it. I'm having
That's
trouble
because
with
of our age.
maybe we can get going in this extraction program to a certain extent. I don't know how much. We'll try.
I did a lot of extraction work earlier, went down to the church library and got some film and copied them off and sent a lot of names in then. And then I was an extraction missionary for a while in one of the wards. But now it's kind of out of the question. My eyes aren't working like they should.
What are your thoughts on the temple?
Very serious about the temple. I've worked in several temples, in the Jordan River Temple, the Dallas Temple, the Timpanogos Temple, and I've performed marriages in several of the others around the country, and I'm very much impressed with the sacred nature of that ordinance of marriage and sealing that I have no way of explaining how much I appreciate and love that temple.
What are your thoughts? Go on.
Well, I'm like him. It's a wonderful feeling to even go to the temple. I worked in the Jordan River Temple for 11 years, and as an ordinance worker, in the Dallas Temple for a year and a half, and then about 3 years here in the Timpanogos. It's just a wonderful place to be. The spirit there is wonderful.
There's something about all of the temples that have a pattern of management and directives that are indicative of a supreme being. This is not run by any individuals. This is done by the Lord, and He's managing and getting. I see a little variations, but they're very minute as what we found in Dallas as opposed to what we found in Jordan River. There was a little bit of not exactly the same, but it was not an important factor. It was just a physical situation.
What are some of the church callings that you've had?
Scoutmaster, yes. I served in the bishopric in Idaho Falls. I received a patriarchal order in Sandy. I was high priest group leader in Sandy. As an elder, I don't know that I had any special callings there. Home teaching is all. But that basically, we've served 3 missions. One in Dallas, one in Ecuador, one in California, one in Linden.
Linden, in the cannery here. We worked there for a year.
Let me think. I did have a thought. Your descendants. Do you know how many descendants you have? Direct descendants.
Well,
170?
well, there's 100, almost 170 great-grandchildren, 51 grandchildren, 9 children. And then we consider the ones they married in our family too. And I'd have to add them all up to find out how many we have. But
It's over 200.
Getting up there.
250.
And the great-grandchildren are coming quite fast. 9, 10 a year, you know.
What are your thoughts on your descendants?
I'm quite impressed. There's something about the fact that we haven't lost any. Those 2 twin boys of Carolisa.
Carries.
Carries. That's right, Carries. That is the first deaths we've had, and the only deaths of all of those children.
What are your thoughts on their involvement in the church?
I think they will be, the fact that they were allotted and assigned to carry is an indicative that they are special spirits.
Is that the ones you're referring to?
Overall.
I think there's something special about the fact that none of them have died and that they're all staying, haven't any record of tobacco, alcohol, drugs, and a few speeding tickets. But other than that, they've been quite honorable and
We can be proud of them.
righteous, honorable citizens.
We're not supposed to have pride. We can be pleased with them.
If you could speak to them, which is what you're doing, what would you want to say to your descendants?
Keep doing what you're doing. Stay close to the Lord. That has been our anchor. If you will stay close to the Lord and participate in His work in the ward activities and at home, you will be on the right path.
What can you tell me about your ancestry? Duncan, the name Duncan. Where does it come from? Where are your ancestors from?
From Scotland. I have a grandfather, John Chapman Duncan, and his father was Homer Duncan. He was an active individual in the prophet's life. I don't know what all he did, but he was involved in the prophet Joseph Smith's life and as a guard or some kind of an attendant. And he's been, he has had some special spiritual revelations to him that has strengthened his testimony, and I'm quite pleased to see when we meet. I'd like to meet him.
When did your family first come to the Americas?
In 1600. The early saints and the early pilgrims that come from England in the Mayflower, whatever it was, in 1600.
Well, what do you know about your heritage as a Wilson?
Well, on the Wilson side, I think they weren't on the Mayflower. They might have been on the next boat, and they have been good citizens. My great-grandfather, Lewis Dummer Wilson Sr., was one of the first High Councilmen. It's listed in the Doctrine and Covenants. His name is listed there. And Everett's great-grandfather, Homer Duncan, was a missionary in England. And on my mother's side, the Deans were converted over in England and were coming across the boat. And the one in charge of their unit there on the boat was Homer Duncan, Everett's great-grandfather. And he was also in charge of them as they crossed the plains. So our ancestors knew each other before we did.
Excellent. What are your thoughts on Jesus Christ?
I need to know more about the events in his life, and I don't know that there's any particular time that would be important, but the more I know about him, the more I can be faithful and keep his commandments as he is directing them.
What about you, Grandma?
I feel the same way Everett does, that we've been studying the scriptures. We know that our prayers are answered, and we have made promises that we would keep the commandments, and we tried to do that, and we can see the results in our lives. And just very grateful for him and his teachings.
What results have you found have come to you from obeying the commandments?
Our economic pattern of the Spirit of the Lord has been involved in my life as a carpenter. I've learned more about him being a carpenter than any other way. I've read some of the things about him, but the fact that he's come to my rescue when I needed employment, he has responded. That has been a very positive and important phase of our relationship. What I need is more of it.
Do you have a thought?
Well, he could finish a job and be all through with it and wonder what the next week was going to bring. And there would come a phone call from someone we didn't know anything about and that wanted him to come and do a job. When we had that first little home that the water was outside the building and he brought it in, that first little home, he had a job at Thanksgiving time, and it terminated. He didn't have any work there. The holidays coming up and winter. So we knelt down and promised the Lord if he would find work for us to do, that we would obey his commandments. And it's happened all the way. We didn't have to worry about work. He had it one way or another. But we tried to keep the commandments too.
Excellent. We'll probably do this again. I'd like to do some more, but do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share?
With the grandchildren or?
this is going to be this is your documentary. What do you want documented?
I'm trying to compare my family with families that we know around the vicinity that are having difficulties. They're having deaths in their family. They're having this their marriages are going on the rocks. And I am so pleased to think that what we've got going for our families and their respect for the gospel is bringing the kind of results that has been promised in the pattern of the church.
Any other thoughts, Grandma?
It's been a good life. We're happy with the way it has been over the years. Just glad that it's about to, it's still good, and it's about to terminate, and hopefully we can stay good to the end. It's been a good life.
Excellent. Okay, well, we're going to stop there.